Hi guys, it's your boy Six, and in 2018, we have to start off with something really cool. Now, Deepin OS is a Linux distro made in China, and to be honest, it's one of the most well-designed distros I've ever seen. Let's check it out. Okay, so we're now in the desktop environment for Deepin OS. Now, just a disclaimer before the video actually continues. Now, if you look to the top left of the desktop, it does say install Deepin, which means that this is a live boot running from a laptop with a live USB disk. So now, that being said, we're actually going to come into our first thing that I find interesting about Deepin OS. I just have to mention how beautifully it's designed. And if we click here, we have a launcher. Now our launcher gives us something sort of like how some Linux distros do it. It looks like the launcher from Ubuntu, but it's not, because this one is placed in the center and the icons in the background are designed just a little bit differently. It kind of reminds me of Zorin OS. If any of you have used that before, it reminds me of Zorin OS. Now we have our standard things like Google Chrome, WPS, which seems to be something that Deepin uses in place of Microsoft Office. Every Linux distro's got to have that. I've never encountered these before though. So now let's move out of our launcher and see what we're provided with. Show our desktop, that's pretty standard. Then we have a multitasking view, which is pretty standard because there's no actual windows open to multitask. That leaves us to our next thing, which is the Deepin File Manager. Let's click into the File Manager and see how it's designed. The design is very, I wouldn't say minimalistic exactly, but it's very clean. And when it comes to Linux, for me, my preference is the cleaner the better. Now we have our standard folders, and like I said, this reminds me heavily of Zorin OS. We have our videos here, music, pictures, documents, downloads, whatever the case may be. And we also have a trash folder that can be accessed, because I know in certain distros, when you delete something, it's actually just completely gone. There's no such thing as a trash folder. So that's something nice to see. After that, the next thing we're going to look at, and this is actually one of the more exciting things that I like about Deepin. The store in Deepin looks amazing. And I mean, I love going back to the term of design, but in terms of design, the Deepin store is leaps and bounds ahead of a lot of stores. Honestly, I would compare this to the Ubuntu store. Now, the extensive set of applications you get here are amazing. If we come to our left, we have our different sort of categories, everything from internet all the way down to development. Now, since we're programmers, we're going to see what they have in the development section. And one thing that Deepin OS prides themselves on is that when they have certain applications, a lot of the time it'll be almost compatible with Windows applications. And when I say almost compatible, I actually use the wrong term. There would be a Windows or Mac version of that same software available. So if you look here, we have our Visual Studio Code, and personally, I didn't even know that was out for any Linux distro. We have Sublime Text, my favorite text editor of them all, which is Atom. Let's see what happens when you click on an item. So it seems that people can leave reviews. So this store is actually very advanced. You can have different people in their accounts leave reviews. Something I have not seen on any store, especially elementary OSs. So I mean, Deepin, whatever this Chinese team is doing, they're doing a very great job. Now we're going to come to Visual Studio Code, see what's available in there. And we have some screenshots. Now the screenshots are very basic, but it gives you an idea of what this, okay, so the images aren't clickable is what I was actually trying to figure out. So it just gives you an idea of what your application is going to look like. Fairly standard, but a lot of stores aren't doing that. Or if some stores have a screenshot feature, you can only just, sometimes the shots aren't even there. All right, so In terms of editors and things to code in, there are a lot. I mean, I've never seen a development section this big in any Linux distro that I've personally used. And I mean, I've used quite a few. The variety is just amazing. Everything from Git to Java to Python. I mean, you can find it all here in the Deepin OS store. Now, let's look at games, because I know Linux lacks in games, definitely. And this seems to be a racing game with no screenshots. How did I guess that? All right, so let's go back into our gaming section. So games that are out for Linux, they're fairly standard, fairly average, nothing too crazy really. I mean, that racing game is probably the most graphic intense game probably in this entire store. I mean, if you really want good games on Linux, the honest truth is that you have to download Steam and just use a Steam client. Now, I think certain applications can get ranked, and it's surprising to see that Firefox is the top, but it is because it's Firefox Quantum. Apparently it's their faster version of the Firefox browser. I haven't personally used it, so there's not really much I can say on that. But when it comes to the 5-star list, Adam makes it. Inkscape, if you want to make vector graphics, that's a good software to have. Vivaldi, which is also another sort of browser. We've got Android Studio. Basically, it seems that some development tools are actually making it to the top, of their actual store, meaning that, to me personally anyway, I think a lot of developers might be using this distro. We have some chat applications, everything from Slack to something called Telegram. I've actually never heard of this either. But either way, their store is very, very extensive. Even has apps for your system. Nice. Now the next thing we're going to look at is our Deepin movie app, and the player seems fairly standard. I have no video on here to show you guys because this is running off a boot disk. But let's move on to our next item, which is the Chrome browser, which everyone pretty much has. There's nothing really special about that. Now, the next thing is our control center. So in some Linux distros, you might actually have to go into a completely different thing, like your application dock, go into your settings, see all your applications in your settings, and then adjust your settings that way. But in Deepin OS, your settings just come out as a bar on the left side, and you can actually organize what each thing looks like, which is very nice. Now you can see my feedback volume right here. For my input, you can see date and time settings. It's basically just a giant scroll list that has everything like power management. So it's your standard settings menu. It's just that you can actually have it where you show icons, or you can have a giant list where you can scroll down and change different things about your operating system. So for the design of their settings menu, I want to give that a 10 out of 10. And of course, at the very bottom, we have our system information. So now, away from our settings menu, what we have is current volume. I mean, a lot of distros don't just show your current volume as you're using the device, but I find that very helpful. If I wanted to turn it up, I could easily just turn it up and down. And if you notice something, is that the animation actually moves with the volume. So that's something that's worth noting. The animation actually moves with the actual volume of the device. We come over here, we've got our Wi-Fi network, which is fairly standard. I just like the way everything is oriented around this small dock on the bottom. You're not going to have any other sort of items at the top that you might have to click on, maybe left, middle, right, like some distros. Everything just comes out of the bottom, or maybe the side for your system information and menu. But that's pretty much it. Another thing that I find really interesting is that it says charging 35%, but if you look closely at this icon, it actually has the level of charge that you have. earlier when this machine was at a low charging level, I saw red and the line actually started down here. So that's something. So basically, if you're using this operating system, looking down at the dock can give you information on volume, Wi-Fi strength, and how much power you have left, which is great. Now if we come in here, we're going to see our calendar, and the calendar looks very basic, but honestly I kind of like it. It's not anything that's too complicated. Yeah, and you can adjust the first day of the week. If you start your week on Thursday, you can do that. Whoever might do such a thing, but the option is definitely there. The final thing that we haven't looked at yet is our music menu. Now our music menu seems fairly okay. Now because this is running off a boot disk, I'm not sure if all the restricted extras have been installed. So we're just going to give it a try and try to play something. And of course, like I thought, nothing plays, which is fine. This is still running off a boot disk, but the design of the actual music player seems pretty decent. We can also set up a dark theme, and honestly, if I got this OS, I would put every single thing on the dark theme, just because this looks a lot cleaner than this. Yeah, so dark theme all the way. Now, in any Linux distro, if you're a developer especially, you're going to want to see what the terminal looks like, right? So for Deepin OS, the terminal has this sort of legacy terminal where it's like a black background with green text. Now we're just going to run sudo, actually you know what, that's too much. We're just going to run the top command just to see some system actions get executed. And this is what your terminal will look like. Now with most Windows in this operating system, as long as it's a system application, you can actually see this menu here for your different settings. Now it seems that you can switch themes, have custom commands, remote management, as well as your standard menu items. Now when we come to switch theme, I'm actually really interested to see what we might get. So if we click on Freya, okay, so our menu looks like this. So when it comes to your command line, with Deepin OS, you can actually customize this quite a bit. And that's something that's really worth noting, because if anybody uses the command line a lot, they know that it's actually a pretty neat feature to be able to customize every single thing about it. Now, I'm not going to sit here and click on every single one of these, but you have quite a few themes, and the list continues going. This theme is kind of horrible, but someone might actually like it. Now, the very last thing that I actually want to look at in this is the text editor, which is right here. Now, the text editor seems fairly simple, nothing too crazy. Alright, so the font looks pretty good. I'm not seeing that menu bar that I saw earlier, but let's actually look here. Okay, so we have something that says go to line, tools. What kind of tools might we have? Spell checking, okay. So this seems like your very standard text editor. There's nothing too crazy about it, and I don't even see it really making lines, as in like any code editor would give you lines to see which text you're on. But at the bottom, it would say line 1, column 26. Display line numbers. Here we go. Okay, so this seems like a fairly decent text editor. I would code on this. Now, I obviously wish that it had, actually, you know what, let's try Java and see if it does colors. And it does. So this is a fairly simple, clean looking text editor, but it has a decent amount of functionality. At the end of the day, it doesn't really need too much. It's simply just a text editor. Close without saving. Alright guys, it's been your boy Six, and this is Deepin OS. Thanks for watching. For more content in the future, like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell.